Hello, everyone, and welcome back. And if you're joining us for the first time today, we're thrilled to see you here. As I said during yesterday's wrap-up, we are so very lucky to have Shubhajit Roy, Vice President and Head of Alliances at Tech Mahindra, with us today. He has put together an amazing program on the power of partnering, and it's time for you to roll up your sleeves, get your coffee, because we are getting to work. And he's also brought together a fabulous panel of buyers and providers and an academic expert on alliances. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Shubhajit. Take it away.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Debbie. Appreciate the opportunity to try and address the audience here today in this workshop. So very excited. Let me get straight away into introducing first the session or the format of the session, and then each of the participants. So we're going to be taking 2 hours of your time today, but we'll first introduce ourselves, which will include Professor Ravi Madhavan at the University of Pittsburgh, who is offered to be the moderator for our session. And we have 4 distinguished panel speakers. I'll just introduce them one by one. And then immediately after that, we will address some core definitions, how-tos for partnering, and then proceed to the panel discussion where Ravi will act as the moderator. Here is where we'll try and make this more interactive for everyone, try and get some questions, and then we'll have a wrap up. So that's really, in a nutshell, the agenda for today. Let me start with quickly introducing you to Professor Ravi Madhavan. Ravi, over to you.
Thank you, Shubhajit. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I teach strategy at the University of Pittsburgh, and my specialty is strategic tools like alliances in particular, as means through which companies work toward innovation. Today I have a very easy job because I have a fantastic panel to work with. So first, along with the rest of the audience, I'll be learning and relearning some of the concepts from Shubhajit, and then working with the great panelists that we have assembled here. So thank you.
Mary, over to you.
Thank you, Shubhajit, and good morning, good day. Hello, everyone. I am Mary Lewis, and I'm a manager in technology sourcing at T-Mobile. This is fairly recent, had been with Sprint for quite a long time, and as of April 1st, Sprint is now part of the new T-Mobile. As my title implies, I do sourcing. So I've been in the sourcing or the buy side of technology services for over 20 years. I've also negotiated technology alliance agreements, and very interesting. Currently in indirect sourcing and source and contract for various types of professional services.
Great. Todd, over to you.
I'm Todd Jensen. I'm excited to be here today. Thanks for joining us, and I love this panel, love these topics that we've been talking about. My background is in operations, and I've done a lot of buying of services, and in those operations, that includes about 7 years working for Ancestry.com, managing their global operations. We bought a lot of business services during that time. And I currently work with the World Bank on strategy initiatives, and I work with other clients on impact sourcing related and BPO related activities.
Thanks so much, Todd. Over to you, Dan.
Good morning. I'm in charge of the company's social impact investing. I also support the customer success team at Sutherland, and I've been involved with the company pretty much since day one as a 4-person startup to a billion-dollar multinational provider. I'm very happy to be invited today.
Excellent. Jackie?
Good morning, everyone. Great to be joining you. I'm Jackie Tannenbaum. I'm Director of Partnerships at Digital Divide Data, one of the early impact sourcing companies. I've been with DDD for 3 years. But prior to that, I've been in technical sales for many years, representing small startups, a women-owned business, as well as multinational BPO companies. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of my insights this morning and hearing everyone else on the panel and from the attendees as well.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So now coming back to the journey for today, why are we, and I'm just going, but I'm not going to be reading out the slides, but as you can see, we've tried to kind of make this into bite-sized components. But in the core part of our workshop today, we talk about why partner for impact, mention about, is it difficult? Is it easy? Can we make it easy? And then how do we get started? And we'll provide you some resources. And then we move into the panel discussion we spoke about, where each of our panelists will come back again. We'll make it interactive with Q&A. In the meanwhile, I do want to make sure that you are aware that you're welcome to quickly text in any questions you might have about anything which any of us are speaking, or if you would like us to address some of them. And otherwise, of course, if you have questions which you would like to which you have, please text it. So I'll just start with a few words about myself. I mean, I'm a certified strategic alliance professional. So I've been working for many years in the field of alliances and business development. This is an interesting profession. It is getting established, as a formal job. I think when I went to school, I don't think there was a profession called alliance management, but today it is now mature. It has now reached a state of maturity where there are very senior leaders. The role of the chief alliance officer is something which many of us aspire to take over, but also it is becoming more and more relevant in today's marketplace. Now that's in my day job, I am a vice president at Tech Mahindra, but I have a passion for working with community and impact sourcing, and it's really interesting to see a chance, and including using this forum as a way by which one can bring in the concepts of partnership into the world of impact sourcing. So I'll get started with why should anyone partner for impact, and also, why did we bring it into this event here today? We realize, as you saw today, our panelists, right, with the world of impact sourcing has both buyers and providers of service, and then of course companies can be large and small, but there's an interesting dynamic between buyers and service providers where, and I don't know how many of you would agree, but sometimes there is this up and parent-child relationship sometimes between buyers and service providers, where the buyer who really kind of calls the shots. But I think in today's world there is this need for typically the procurement teams to start looking at service providers differently and the word partnership becomes more and more, I think, relevant. So it becomes a more conversation between equals, between adults and adults, rather than a parent-child. There's also another dynamic, which is about providers who have huge contracts with buyers. They have an opportunity to try and work with smaller service providers, actual providers who work in the community at the grassroots with either for-profit social enterprises or non-NGOs, and they can actually subcontract work to those. The large service providers can subcontract work to those smaller impact service providers, and sometimes you have this very interesting dynamic where the large service provider starts looking down almost at the smaller service provider, and it's kind of unfair. But I think with the world as it stands today, good things are happening and people are starting to kind of correct that, and everyone's moving to a more partnership approach. And that's when Debbie and I were speaking about why in the world of impact sourcing, to make this really successful, how could we kind of bring in some of those concepts, and that's what we're going to be speaking about for the next few minutes. So quickly, why partner for impact, and how does one become successful. Now, success in the world of impact sourcing, one needs multiple skills, lots of cross disciplines. There's the alliance manager in some ways will say that he's a salesperson, an operations person, a procurement person, a development person. He has to work with multiple hats, but partnering is a very critical competency for success in the world of impact sourcing. And that's really why we have the workshop here today. But let me give you some facts. Today, 50% of the global CEOs do want to partner. The challenge is, how do you partner, and are there any risks? There's also a frightening statistic, which is that 60% of all alliances do fail. So something has to be done. While there is a greater need for partnerships, there's also an understanding that there's a very high failure rate. And what can one do to try and make this more, make partnering more successful? And I think with the way the market is changing, organizations have to keep continuously evolving to address new challenges in the market. Customers are changing, technology is changing, expectations are changing, regulation compliance are changing. And then there are more challenges in the world of impact sourcing on the pools and the pools of resources who we work with. Each of them are impacted by geography, climate change, political turmoil, and a whole bunch of other situations. So there's a lot of changes which are happening, and we feel that partnership can really make a big difference. But today what I'm going to speak to you is going to be more at a very high level, talking now. Ignore the role you play in your company, but just think of how partnerships really take place at a very high level. Mostly partnerships take place between two companies. There's a lot of conversations now happening about ecosystems of partnerships, three-way partnerships, 360-degree partnerships. But today, let's just focus first on the concept of partnering. And let me just talk to you a little bit about what is the context. Now, managing alliances to some people can say, oh, that's very simple. But when you actually get into it, some folks find it quite complex. There are life cycles, target solutions, metrics, alliance in sales enablement, operations. There's a need for a method in the madness. And what I'm going to show you now is a simple framework to help manage all that complexity. So let's start with the beginning. At the core, we should always keep customers first, right? And then we have our offerings if we are a provider of product or services. And then we have partners who can also offer complementary services for the same customer. But here's one of the reasons why we need to partner. There are resource constraints, so that's an economic pressure. There's cost pressures, there's competitive pressures, and there's regulatory pressures, right? So all these kind of become, key drivers for why one should consider partnering. If you're a software company, you suddenly realize that you might not have all the competencies to build everything, and you might need partners from resources from another partner company. If you're a services company, you want technology solutions to take to your customers. You want something new, something differentiated. So many times, services companies seek out to software companies for partnerships. So just giving you a context about why people partner and why they come together. But at the end of the day, the core is, how do we service our customers better? And here's a simple point, right? Alliances, partnership strategy needs to be kind of in tune with the company business strategy. I always say that the alliance strategy is the bedrock always remains, what's the company's goal, what's the company's business strategy, and the alliance strategy must cover all the key components of the business, which is typically the delivery pieces, the sales pieces, the marketing pieces. So everything is considered. So anyway, here are some other words and terms which one uses in the world of partnering. The charter, why are we partnering together? Are there any guidelines we could have? How will we measure our partnerships? What is the life cycle of a partnership? How do we build joint intellectual property? How do we develop, go about market development? And how do we engage in our field to meet our customers into client opportunities, right? So anyway, the alliance framework is a very simple way to kind of say that we've thought about all the components, but today we'll try and make it simple for you. we'll try and tell you that it is not so complex, and and I'll show you a way forward, step by step. So partnering can be easy. It's almost as easy as 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not perfect, not very easy, but if you, for example, use a simple, consistent alliance framework across the business, I think you're making life simpler for you. That's number one. Number two is, when you look at partnering, different companies look at this differently, but in this particular scenario, when you're typically looking at a software company and a services company, you can have partnerships which help a services company, for example, qualify for market opportunities. And similarly, there will be some partners who can help that services company compete and win business. So they're enabling alliances and differentiating alliances. That's one way of looking at the market of potential partners. Different companies and your business situation could be different, but what we're trying to say is use the same framework for partnerships and use it across all the types of partners your company may have as you proceed in your business. So 1 and 2. And 3, this is trying to look at tiering the partnerships you have. You can start off with just 1 or 2 partners, but how do you encourage partners to move from one level to the other? And one point I have found is if you can tier the partnerships, sometimes people use metal level, silver, gold, platinum, whatever you want to use, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. But the point is to try and give partners a certain amount of transparency as to how you are looking at the market, and you're looking at all your own partners. Many times, if a large company has more than 10, 20, sometimes hundreds of partners, how will they manage them? So when you start tiering the partners, you can start viewing them, reporting them differently. And here what I've shown is number of sometimes revenues which you expect with the partnership, the number of client opportunities or market deals you will have, who will own it, and whether you need executive sponsorship, right? So I've just kind of put a simple way by which you can tier your partners, and you encourage partners to move from one level to the next level and so on. And you can explain to them that's the reason why you're spending more time with them, putting more marketing funding there, and so on. And the fourth piece in my 1, 2, 3, 4 suggestion of how easy it is to start with partnering is to try and understand the various life cycle stages in partnerships. We like to talk about the idea of partnering, which is basically the mnemonic for identify, define, establish, and assess. It's something which I've been fortunate to try out in a number of companies where I've worked. And the idea model is kind of interesting because right now we have right from the CEO of a company or the president of the company to the newest recruits, all better aware of where things stand in the partnership. So I'll get into more detail about the 4 life cycle stages. But as you can see here, we've got the identify stages. What can we do before we even start thinking about partnership, before we meet a partner? In the define stages, how do we conduct ourselves when we meet for the first time this partner? Establish is how do we win in the market together? Maybe it's a proof of concept, a pilot project, but really in the established phase, you try to say, okay, if we're really partnering at the end of the day, how do we win in the market together? So the established phase is all about winning. And I will come to each of these stages in more detail in the next few minutes. But the established phase is of course what is the most fun part, where you're trying to create activity in the market and so on. The assess phase is what do we do after we won the first customer or the first success? How do you accelerate it? Is this partnership so painful that you want to actually abandon this partnership and say, let's do something else, or let's look at another partner? Or sometimes you might actually have a situation where, after this first success, you might want to say, we love this partnership so much, we would really like to invest. And, sometimes the ultimate level, sometimes people will say, is actually a complete acquisition. So it's interesting how there's also this connection between mergers and acquisitions and strategic partnerships. Most times, though, you assume that two legal entities stay separate. They have no intention of merging, but it's just one more option in the assess stage if and when it does come up. So let's talk about the 4 stages. And again, if there are any questions, please feel free to keep putting them on the chat window. Amanda will keep sharing that with us, so I can have a better view on them. So the identify stage is the first stage in the idea model. We are talking primarily about it kind of comes back to that: why are we partnering? Maybe we have a gap in our existing offerings. That input could come from a customer, it could come from one of your team members, or sometimes you might just have a partner who comes back and says, hey, I think you've got a gap, why don't you look at what I have to offer. What is important also is to try and get internal champions who say, yes, I like this idea of partnerships. Maybe maybe we do have a gap, and we try to find who is going to be uh, an anchor for that relationship, and we try to find a designated champion. We ask in this stage that champion to articulate why does he want this partnership, what does he expect out of it, what is the investment he's willing to put, and also try and find out what are the benefits, and try to seek formal management approval to explore this partnership. Most times the partner manager or who is responsible for taking this forward then looks at a business case to be created, and you try to look at the market to try and find out who would be the ideal partners, a long list, if I were to say, of potential partners, and one starts initial conversations. How one closes this is you try and offer non-disclosure agreements, and try and make sure that those can be sent out to these potential partners, try and have those signed, have high-level exchange of business informations once that's done, and then you get in the part where you're trying to identify who is the best potential partner. And at the end of the identify stage, typically what you'll end up is a short list of 2 or 3 partners. Naturally, you might choose to have one as your top partner or preferred partner, but it's always a good idea to actually look at a short list of up to 2 partners, sometimes 3 partners. Again, it brings in that level of positive competition. When you're talking to one company, there's nothing wrong in saying that you are also exploring other options, so that he understands that he needs to be careful and put in his best efforts to make this partnership succeed. Because in all reality, if he doesn't, chances are the partnership will not work. So, but in any case, at the end of the identify stage, it's always good to have at least 1 or 2 partners to continue the conversations with. The define stage. This is where we are looking at formal term sheets, where we call out each of the next steps in a partnership. We also try to create some transparency and kind of create a simple list of contacts, and try to patch them up on both sides as to who is going to be the key contact for, let's say, the salesperson for North America, or for technology, or for contracts, or for marketing, or for delivery, so that the individual contacts on each company side are identified, and then you can have the next level of conversations with each of those contacts. Of course, make sure that the champion is the main person who's kind of running with this. If you are the champion yourself, you can actually kind of have a better idea about what needs to be done, but you are the one who then is driving the next level of conversations. This is the time when you start trying to look at, from a sales perspective or business development perspective, which markets are we addressing, which verticals are we going regionally, and are we phasing it? So one is realistic in terms of your plan. And you also try to make sure, as this moves to the next level, delivery from your organization, operations in the BPO world, or product delivery, or software delivery, or implementation teams, they are also available willing and they are available, providing the resources to make the success happen. Otherwise, you don't want to have the first part of the company, which is the sales people or the marketing people trying to bring opportunities, and then you don't have delivery and operations capability to make this happen, right? So it's important to try and make sure that you bring in all the elements and all the people in the define stage. You also, at this point, review the business case. Like, this is why we were looking at the partnership. Is this working? Is this, now that you have a potential partner, will this work? You get more numbers, you're more clear about what the business case is for success. You can also share with this with your partner to try and say, okay, this is what you can achieve, this is what we can achieve. So it's also important to also remember that you can keep a plan B in case things fail at the defined stage with this particular partner. Because the defined stage ends in the signing off of a formal partnership agreement where you're kind of locking in your contracts and sometimes even service level agreements. But it's always good to keep a plan B just in case things fail. So that's one of the reasons why at the identify stage you have two or three partners, and at the defined stage you have one, but maybe an alternate partner as well. Sometimes you might also want to have two partners for different geographies or different market verticals. So that's the defined stage. And you might notice each time at the end of a stage, what we try to do is have a document that is signed or reviewed. And that kind of gives you the clarity about how you are moving from one stage to the other stage. Because otherwise, partnerships can, the cycle can be very loose and it gets confusing for people at the partner company as well as your own company. Oh, I didn't know. We've already signed the NDA? Great. So that's a very simple way to understand that we can start sharing information with the partner at the defined stage. At the end of the defined stage is we are now ready to go to market with the partner. So that's the established phase, which is, as I mentioned, the fun part. Here's where now that the solution is ready, what are salespeople going to take to the market about our partner? What are we speaking about as what is the joint solution? So we have collateral, presentations, a list of target customers, FAQs ready. What if the customer asks this? Have you thought about, scenario A, scenario B? So this is where the sales enablement happens, where you train the salespeople. You also get the delivery and the solutions people ready so that they can speak to the next level of conversations when customers get interested. And then you go into the creation of the joint pipeline. I have a 2+2+2 model I'll speak about later, but at the end of the day, establish is all about creating success. And to get that success, you have to try out a whole bunch of market opportunities with your partner. So this is where you look at building a joint pipeline with your partner. In the, one can also look at a try and buy program. Sometimes one says, okay, dear customer, for the next 30 days, if you're interested, our partner and we want to give you a 20% off, or, you make it more easy for existing customers to try the program out or try the solution out. So that's a smart way sometimes, because these customers already know you. You're making it easier for them to try it out. And if they don't, no problem. But in the meanwhile, you can continue trying to close the first sale. How the third stage, the established phase, ends is when you're looking at a final contract with your end customer. So here is where, and because you've already clarified, is this going to be a three-way client agreement, or is it just going to be a two-way agreement where you front end and you have a separate back-to-back arrangement with your partner? Those are pieces which are already cleared out in the defined stage. But in the established phase, you actually have the final contract. So, this is when you actually start to see revenue. You actually go through the pains and the pleasures of getting your first customer. So that's the end of the established phase. Okay, we are now, and now we move on to the assess phase, which is the fourth stage, where you look at, we've got the first client. What did we learn? Are there things to improve upon? Is there content in terms of deliverables which we can use or reuse for more client opportunities? What can we do in terms of joint marketing now to publicize this for this first success? And then what we do is review progress and also continue to between the two companies to look at building operational and executive sponsorships so that people realize, oh, not only did we launch this partnership, we have a joint customer. Now we're looking at further development, right? So it's important to try and make sure the executive sponsors also come in at this point. This is the also the stage when you try to have regular reviews on how to take relationships to the next level or even a lower level. You can, for example, sometimes you might have a gold level partner, but because things aren't happening, you might decide, look, maybe we want to try and go down a level, so the level of investment in marketing might come down. But many times you might actually want to take it forward and go to the higher level. So typically you'll go from bronze to silver, silver to gold, and so on. But in the assess phase is when you keep and do this on a continuing basis, is the a revised portfolio of all the partners you have. So here at a senior level, you try to say, okay, is this making sense? How do we do that? And as I mentioned, here's also where you start looking at the accelerate, abandon, and acquire at the end of the assess phase. So these are the 4 stages. As I mentioned, please keep your questions, keep sending them on the chat window. We'll try and address them as well, but I'll proceed on. As we promised you, the first part of my conversation is to try and get you more familiar with terms used in the world of partnerships. But what we're trying to do here is also try and bring in some resource which you could use. And I'll talk to you about 2 particular resources: the idea checklist and the M2Y2O2 model, which I alluded to earlier. The idea checklist, and I'll have separate slides on that. And then there is the ASAP, the Strategic Alliance, the Association of Strategic Alliance Professionals, which has a whole bunch of resources. They have a fantastic handbook which professional alliance managers have put together. So even if you're starting off with a partner program, it's something which I would encourage you to think about. But here's the website as well. So talk a little bit about the idea checklist. The idea checklist is so this is one of the I hope we can send this to you if you're interested. It's an Excel sheet which we can email you. 100 questions to ask yourself for each stage of the life cycle, and you basically move from one stage to the other stage only when you've at least answered or reviewed the relevant questions. It's just a good way by which you can keep saying, okay, am I really at this stage? Which stage of the life cycle am I in? So you don't miss out. But sometimes what happens is that before you go, having a checklist is convenient because it makes sure you're not missed out on some of the steps which are critical for a successful partnership. But now that you've got that document, you can keep looking at it again and again, say, okay, 6 months ago, this is what we had. Has anything changed? So it's always good to keep looking at your checklist. And remember that this Excel sheet, which we can email you after our session, can be modified to suit your industry and unique business. It's been tried out at multiple companies, and we're grateful actually the students of the University of Pittsburgh, their MBA class actually, helped me put that together. So, it's really a great resource. Now the M2Y2O2 model. This is really a very simple method to create a joint pipeline, which sometimes we call the 2+2+2 plan. The first of all, our side, assuming that we are 2 partners, our side offers to take the partner to 2 of our existing customers where we are present, we are well entrenched, and the partner is not present, right? So that's M2 stands for my 2. And next, so here this is a way by which we start looking at 2 accounts where the partner gets the confidence. Oh, okay. So Tech Mahindra does have customers. They also have relationships, and also Tech Mahindra has the confidence to be able to take us in front of them. So it shows the commitment from my company to take you as a partner to market opportunities. Hopefully the point of this is when we start opening up, our partner realizes that this is a genuine company worth partnering, and then he opens up and says, okay, I can take you to 2 places where you are not, where I'm not present. So this becomes the your 2 for the partner. So suddenly where it starts off by taking that baby step of bringing in two opportunities. Suddenly your pipeline now becomes 4 because a partner has brought in 2 of his opportunities. where he is present and you're not present, right? So there's something your salespeople would love because now you've got an opportunity to try and expand the pipeline for potential revenue. And then finally, we look at add another 2 accounts where neither of our 2 companies, the partner company or my own company, are present. And then we try to say, okay, what if we were to do, let's say, a virtual event or a marketing campaign to get 2 more opportunities, to get 2 more customers. So this is a very simple way by which we start proposing, starts with 2, then 4 and 6 opportunities, and you can kind of, you can create trust, but you can create a pipeline that can scale with time. And the beauty is you can actually start by, let's say, if you're a company which is global, you can start with just North America or maybe the West Coast. And then the second piece could be, you could go by an industry vertical. But the beauty is that once you do the 2 + 2 + 2 with one geography or with one vertical, then you can expand it globally to other verticals, and so you can expand your pipeline. So this is a very simple way to create trust and build upon your pipeline. So I just want to kind of now bring in the, so we've talked to you about, as we promised, some of the terms used in the world of partnering, some simple steps to get started with the 1, 2, 3, 4. We talked about the 4 stages of partnering. We talked about some of the resources available. And now let's talk about how does one apply this in the world of impact sourcing. And right in the beginning, I mentioned partnering is just one of those components, but I think there is an opportunity for us to try and see how we can apply the rules of partnerships, which apply typically for IT or BPO, and apply it in the world of in the world of impact sourcing. So I'll be now bringing in our panelists and Professor Ravi Madhavan to kind of speak. But one piece I do want to bring up is the fact that there are challenges, like we talked about, between procurement and buying in the world of impact sourcing. And I'll just share a little bit about how I've found it myself, that even in a large services company like Tech Mahindra, we find that it's always interesting that everyone's not completely aligned. And sometimes when you find that an individual in a large service provider, he might be very comfortable with working with buyers, but not yet comfortable with working with smaller providers who could become potential resource suppliers for impact sourcing, right? So today, I do want to try and bring this up. So irrespective of what role you play, hopefully, and our panelists will kind of bring that up. So without further ado, I'll kind of move on now to the panel discussion. Ravi, if you're on, maybe you can take it from here.
Yes, Shubhajit, thank you. I'm very much on. Thank you for bringing us to this point. Before we start on the panel, though, I just wanted to say there were a couple of questions that were posted on chat. So perhaps you could help address that before we, before we get to. There was a question about, whether partners are typically of equivalent size, or another one about how do you keep different partnerships from, well, how do you keep them at arm's length, separate from the buy side, etc. So since we have a few minutes, perhaps it'll be best if you can address those, and then the panel can take over.
Definitely, yeah, and I realize that we are moving faster than we had planned. So can you just recap the question, which is, how do you keep partners at arm's length?
Yes, so the question was, how do you keep partnerships on the sales side separate from partnerships at the buy side? And in fact, Mary, I believe you had posted this question, so perhaps you can elaborate on that. I think it's a great question.
Sure. Mary, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Ravi. first of all, a fantastic summary that you've put together, Shubhajit. I just see absolute opportunities to apply this, and I also plan to share it with some of my colleagues, some of whom are looking to enhance the partnering opportunities. I sit squarely on the buy side, and the challenge that we always run into is that if you're looking to potentially have a partnering arrangement with a company that happens to be a supplier, how do you keep those relationships distinct and separate? Because the concern is always the reciprocity. It's the attorneys are always very concerned that we don't set something up, that there's an expectation that a supplier will expect a certain amount of revenue from us as a customer. At the same time, we're looking to that supplier to partner to enhance our mutual revenues. So if you can discuss maybe ways to kind of keep those separate, I think that would be very helpful, especially to those on the buy side.
Good point. So what you're saying is that that is technically a pot of gold for the suppliers, but you might not want to expose all of that as a buyer. Is that correct?
Well, the word that I'm specifically referring to is reciprocity, which is, if there's a conditioned, well, we can go forward and do, partnering to enhance our revenue, but we expect a certain amount of revenue from us as buying their services, buying the supplier's services. That has proved to be sticky in multiple situations, and the concern I would have as a buyer is how do I make sure that our buy decisions are truly and independently based on the best value and the best supplier for the matter at hand, whether it's goods or services, and that may be a different relationship. In other words, we may not buy as much from a supplier as they would like us to buy from, but we see that supplier as an opportunity to gain revenue. And I ran across this when, during discussions many years ago, we were doing technology alliances, and it's very sticky because there's not a quid pro quo in partnering per se. There needs to be 1 + 1 = 3, not just 1 + 1 = 2. So how do you address those kinds of conundrums?
Well, I think, and I'll ask some of the rest of our panelists, including Todd, to respond. In my view, and this is just me, Mary, I think there has to be a certain amount of transparency. You don't need to be completely definitive. You don't need to make a formal commitment to a particular supplier. But I think there's employee confidentiality also is something which you can't speak. What you say inside the company to your own colleagues is not what you can communicate to your partners or your suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is a certain amount of transparency that does need to come out, and I've seen slowly many companies have started using it, and actually using it to their advantage by saying, some of our large buyers in the GISC, for example, have actually talked openly about that this next year they're going to be spending millions in diversity and inclusion, and that kind of creates the activity, the commitment from the various service providers to start looking at that buyer. Now, they might not open up completely, but I think it shows commitment. So anyway, I'll ask Todd if he's had this challenge. But I personally feel, Mary, a lot of times it's a question of slowly opening up and sharing more than you might have ever done before. But I think in that spirit of partnership, sometimes it makes sense to, you can say that this is available, but you have to earn my confidence for me to give that to you. And by the way, there's also a contest, or there's a positive competition between two of other. And that's why even using the tiering model, I was trying to explain that, you're showing how you can progress from one to the other and what can be applied for between, let's say, a buyer, between partnerships can also be applied to your suppliers, where you say, I plan to give 50% of my total spend to the top two, to this level of partners. And by the way,
Okay.
you are a partner, you are in that tier. So for you, the pot of gold or the potential revenue is so much, but you have to earn it. So I hope that's one.
I like that concept. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I see Mary's point, and the other part where the convolution of alliances could be troublesome is how much business damage occurs if you have to withdraw from one of those that you've created a dependency on. And but you know, I guess my solution is I've never met a legal team that didn't know, that wasn't excited to craft a cleverly worded paragraph to address a specific situation with somebody. So you know, the solution, and what Subhajit said, it's transparency to say, look, we have these three vulnerabilities by bringing you into this, and we're going to have to address some worst case scenarios in those vulnerabilities, and that's just going to be part of our agreement. Can you live with that? You know, we can't have you doing this, this, or this, but otherwise, here's the room that you can play in.
Yeah.
Shubhajit, if I may just add to that, I think this question is really fascinating one, because to my mind, it picks up on a central paradox in alliances, right? That is, on the one hand, as you were articulating, you know, you really need a great level of transparency and trust for alliances to work. At the same time, there is a paradox where the companies are still separate companies, right? And so, in you know, some people in the alliance world talk about, you know, they use this metaphor of same bed, different dreams.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not necessarily endorsing that, but the fact is, you know, you have companies that have their own agendas, right? And this business partnership has to balance that, the benefits of greater integration and transparency and the risks of greater integration and transparency. And I think this question really, you know, brings that out. One of the questions that I ask my students is this, as to think about a scenario where you've got a call from a competing company, a rival, to have a discussion about a partnership. So I say, what's the first thing you've got to do, right? And so they'll come up with a number of things, but every once in a while, somebody really smart will say, call your antitrust lawyer first before you do anything else, right? Now, again, I'm just mentioning that to highlight this tension. And one of the reasons why that discipline that you laid out, Shubhajit, is really important is because it helps the managers and the companies to think about both aspects of it and to arrive at, you know, a way to balance it. So I think that's a great question.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So any more questions? Because what we'll do is, you know, just see if there are any more questions which came into the Q&A, Amanda, and then move into the panel discussion as planned.
I don't have any questions that have come in quite yet, but I'm sure they're going to be coming soon.
All right. Okay. No problem.
All right. Then, so then, yeah.
Go ahead, Ravi. I think then let's proceed with the panel discussion as we had planned.
Great. Thank you, Shubhajit. Again, you know, this discussion has very nicely teed up this idea that partnering is an important capability, right? In a broader context, as well as, you know, in our context today, specifically for impact sourcing. And I like the way that you laid out right at the beginning that a particular reason why partnering is important in impact sourcing is because you need different kinds of skills, right? And I think we have an excellent panel here today, which reflects those different sets of capabilities. But I'd also like to point out that in terms of working with the panel members, I've really been amazed at how each of those panel members not only has deep experience with partnering in this particular context, but they're also very articulate about the skills and the values that are of which those capabilities are composed. And most important for this particular role today, panelists, you are all very passionate about partnering and about helping other people understand it. That's the reason why, right at the beginning, I said I have a very easy job. To get us started, I'm going to say, at risk of greatly oversimplifying, that what Shubhajit has laid out for us is what are some of the basics about partnering, right? And implicit in some of the discussion so far has also been the idea that while we must pay a lot of attention to mastering some of those basics, there could be different types of barriers that will come up, in the execution of it. So I'd like to focus our questions on those two things. First, what are the basics of partnering? And two, what are some barriers that you have been exposed to in your practical experience? So with regard to that, let's go with the first question. Drawing on your experience in impact sourcing, please share with us a favorite anecdote, right, or a practical insight about the basics of partnering that you have been exposed to, in your personal careers, in your experience with the current company, prior companies, etc. Again, the goal is really to take the constructs that Shubhajit has introduced and try to help us understand those constructs in terms of practical experiences. Okay, so with that, and while we are discussing that, again, I would encourage the attendees to share their questions or perhaps even experiences, right? Because again, partnering is something that, all of us have had experiences, good, bad, and ugly with, and it'll be good to know what some of those experiences have been. So I would encourage the attendees to share some of those things as the panelists begin sharing those. So with that rather lengthy setup, Todd, can I invite you to share some of your experiences or insights?
I'm happy to. Thanks, Ravi. Thanks for the great information that's been shared. I want to share a practical insight and say, from my perspective, and I think from Mary's too, is we're trying to help, for those of you that are listening to this now or later when you can review the recorded version of it. If you're a service provider that is an impact sourcing service provider, we're trying to pull the curtain back a little bit and help you see what's happening behind the scenes that can help you get those sales and win those contracts. And my insight really relates to, using a football metaphor, the blocking and tackling of partnering, and that's listening. And it's being candid and open with each other. Now we've all dealt with, whether you're on the supply side or the buy side of this, we've all dealt with supply chain or purchasing people who are Neanderthals, and none of them are on this call, and none of them are listening to this conversation because they're too busy trying to figure out how to get to Tahiti next year. But they come at a partnering discussion from a cost and compliance perspective, and that's it. And they come in with a marching list, and you have to meet these criteria, and you have to meet that price, and I'm going to look great if I can beat you down to getting it at a slightly better price. And that's all they're interested in. They're interested in getting your compliance for the price so that they can walk away with the win and the contract. And that's changing. And there are more and more sophisticated buyers and supply chain managers that come into this. There's people like Mary that have been doing it the right way her whole career. And that what they do, what the Marys of the world do, and what I tried to do, is to be open about what my needs were and what my challenges were. So my advice to you, if you're an impact sourcing service provider, is to listen for that in clients and to try to work past the negotiating leverage part of the conversations. Try to get past that to being candid about what you're really great at, where the centers of strength are, and where you believe you have capacity to expand. And if you're on the buy side, listen, try to understand what's at the heart and what the capabilities of the leaders are in the service providers you're evaluating. Subhajit said at the very beginning, it was all about the customer. And so what is that customer for that client that you're trying to land? Who is that customer and what's valuable to them? What does the organization look like? How is the value being created in that organization? And then where do you fit and where do you match against that? That type of authentic, value-based conversation takes you to partnering. And for somebody that's already has that in mind, and you're used to dealing with old-fashioned purchasing people, you're going to miss an opportunity. If you can listen for and detect buyers that are trying to build partnerships, man, you can cut past all that leverage language and just start talking about capabilities and possibilities. And I think it's a benefit to both sides of that equation.
That's excellent. And apart from talking about the capabilities, I like that you also brought in the role of personal skills like listening, right? So it's not just about organizational process, right? And if we have time in the discussion, I'd like to maybe get to a question about that, right? In terms of what are some of the personal managerial skills that you would want to see in your own alliance people as well as in your alliance partners, but we'll get to that. Dan, how would you follow up on that in terms of some of the basics of partnering?
Sorry about that. I was having trouble with the mute button. I was listening along and thinking about my own personal experience and company's experience. And one of the most commonly asked questions we get in a lot of forums, particularly in IAOP and other places, is how do we partner with or contract with larger organizations when we're just, not known. At the same time, every major company that we're selling to, and most of the people on the provider side are working with, have initiatives to reduce the number of suppliers, right? So you got procurement objectives, and then you have needs. And I actually think that there's a size question. The size question comes into play, and I believe emerging players, have a great ability to focus. They have agility. They can custom tailor a solution from the menu, basically through to the dessert. Scale players obviously have scale and footprint and great experience contracting with larger organizations. And I believe that folks need to really focus on, what's the specific value that you are representing. I don't believe elements like impact sourcing or diversity and inclusion can be your calling cards, because I think it was Mary who was mentioning every company is investing in some form of this today. So I think, you lead with what you're strong with, you focus on what you can deliver. And I don't believe this size barrier is really as big as it is perceived as.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. So, what you have added to the conversation is this idea that clarity about the specific value that you bring to the table is really important, right? Being able to articulate that in a compelling way.
Yep. And I think, I think people will be pleased. I know small companies that dream to be large, and I know large companies that dream to be small, to be able to focus on specific customer success factors. And I just think it's an interesting time.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Mary, again, sticking to this theme of, specific experiences or insights in the broad arena of basics of partnering.
Yes, Ravi, my challenge is trying to keep it to just a one or a small number of examples. I love the movie line that went, "If you build it, they will come." And building off of Dan and Todd's explanations and stories that they share, my experience has been that when you have smaller suppliers, and first Sprint and now T-Mobile have a very dynamic supplier diversity program. And so generally the diverse suppliers are smaller companies. And the challenge I've always seen is that they'll send you information, they send you the 10 meg deck, which of course, like, don't send me anything bigger than 2. And then they expect, okay, now what's next? And what I try to do is I try to understand what these individuals offer for 2 reasons. One, I want to make sure that if they are able to provide a good or service, typically it's more of a service than anything else, that I can direct them to the right business unit. Sprint and now T-Mobile have supplier diversity teams, and those diverse suppliers will connect with those teams, but it's still the onus on the sourcing manager to understand where these suppliers will play. And if I have a chance, I will set up one-on-ones. And one of the questions that is my absolute favorite to ask, and I don't try to play stump the chump with a supplier, is I ask them, how are they different than their competitors? Or what makes them different? What is their value proposition? Or which competitors do they have? And for the supplier who responds to competition, I am immediately suspect, because my concern is, do they not understand the market in which they play, or do they actually have some sort of a legal monopoly, such as a patent or something? And I was so compelled to, because I kept seeing these issues arise over and over again, that I partnered with our supplier diversity team, and I just said, we have to do a how do you do business with Sprint. I wanted to help. So the first step, the first inclination, Ravi, is you got to be able to understand what the suppliers, what the business partner is trying to share. And they have to understand, I think it was to Todd's point, when you do business with a big companies, we might be that big fish, but don't lay all your hopes and dreams on just catching that big one and thinking all your problems will go away. So the long story short on this is that I put together a presentation, and it was at a breakfast meeting. We had standing room only for how to do business with Sprint. And in Kansas City, which is where Sprint had been headquartered, now we're with T-Mobile, we're headquartered in Washington, in Bellevue, Washington. We had a lot of the area suppliers come. And my concern, my sincere desire was to help them help us figure out what they do and how they do it. And the other thing that I did with this breakfast seminar was that we partnered with a small supplier who already was doing business with Sprint. And that was so helpful, because that supplier, from their perspective, they're looking at it from a lens of, here are some of the demands you might expect. I never would have thought, hey, have a ready line of credit. I would have been advising the suppliers to do something else simply because that's not the lens through which I'm looking. It was a very big success. And the interesting thing is that multiple companies in the Kansas City area started following suit. How do you do business with Hallmark? How do you do business with Black & Veatch? How do you do business with, I mean, just any number of companies? And that helped that community. So Shubhajit and Ravi, you both are talking about communities. These are the communities in which we live. And at the heart of partnering is relationship. And understanding that you're going to have people who, in a large company, they're going to be maybe reorganized into a different position, take a job outside of the company. Those smaller companies have to be proactive in maintaining relationship. If you build it, they will come. Doesn't always work out. It has, just like a marriage, you have to work at it. And successful marriages are when both parties work at it. So I hope this answers your question.
It does. It absolutely does. And I think, again, what I like about it is that you picked up on, again, two themes that I think we have been talking about right from the beginning of the session, that there is a big role for individual skills and capabilities like listening, but equally for formal processes at the company level, right? And this notion of, let's make it clear what the providers need to know about how to do business with us. That's fantastic, right? That is, to put it simply, one might say, don't be your own worst enemy, right? By making it so opaque that only the most determined providers will be able to work with you. So great, thank you. And the last thing I'd say about it is that in laying out that particular example, you've also touched a little bit on the barriers. So I think we'll probably come back to that in the next round of questions. But let's move to Jackie. Jackie, I know you have some very interesting perspectives on the same, basics of partnering questions. So please share your insight or anecdote.
Thank you, Ravi. I'm happy to. And I'm hearing what my colleagues are saying here, and so much comes to mind about building relationships, and that's really what it's all about. But what's so difficult sometimes is getting that relationship off the ground, and where do you start? So what comes to mind is a real life experience of working with a supplier, trying to get into those big accounts, trying to see how we can be recognized. And I had an opportunity years ago, not with DDD, with a prior company I was with, to participate in a reverse auction, kind of what Todd was alluding to, the old procurement model of saying, where can we get the best price? And I was hesitant to do it, but I said, you know what? If I want to be in this game, I gotta, I gotta play. And so I participated. I gave my best shot with pricing, completed all the forms, all the paperwork. It was online, it wasn't paperwork, but submitted my bid, and I won. My company won. And I was really surprised. I was thinking our pricing's not the best. I know we're not the lowest price out there, but we entered into this agreement with a large, maybe it was a Fortune 200 company, developed a really strong relationship with the buyers. And one day in passing, that reverse auction came up. And I told my client, I said, gee, I was really surprised that we were the winning bidder. I said, our pricing, I can't believe we won on price. And he said, you know what? He said, you didn't. You weren't the lowest price. But you were the only vendor that took the time in the notes section to put in your approach, your processes, the added value you would bring to the relationship. And he said, it made us step back and think, where were we going to get the best value? Where were we going to get the best services and support? And he said, and we're so pleased that we made that decision. So it made me take a step back and look to see what had happened there. I mean, I started out by taking a risk. I participated in a buying situation I wasn't really enamored with. And I have a lot of, conversations with other suppliers who tell me they never participate in the RFP process. They don't like to go into these bid situations, but sometimes you have to just, take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm going to do it. And you know what? You can be successful if you're able to communicate the way Todd was saying, and Dan was talking about it. We talk about what it is you do, what you can do well, where you're going to be a trusted and valued partner in this relationship. And that's how, that's how you start the relationship sometimes, by just putting your best foot forward and being able to communicate what it is you can do well. And it's well received. I mean, from my experience over the years, I find that you can be well received as a small supplier, or someone who might not appear to be the first choice of, or you might not think you're going to be the first choice of the buyer that you're trying to build a relationship with.
Well, thank you. I think that's a wonderful story. And quite apart from the fact that you have reinforced this importance of clarity with regard to what value do you bring to the table. The other thing that I find really, interesting about the story is, don't just assume that because it's a reverse auction, there's no room to, to clarifying those things, right? And in fact, if I heard you right, I think you said it was in the notes section that you had laid that out, right? So the process itself did not really have a lot of room for it, but you were creative and you made use of the notes section to lay that out. And that's what, got you to the final contract. So that's fantastic. But again, don't go away, Jackie, because for the next question, I'd like to do this in the reverse order. So, you are on deck, and that is build on what you said to talk about an interesting barrier that you have either run into or experienced, right, or heard about, right? And that along with that, maybe what's the countermeasure, right? If somebody in the audience runs into a similar kind of a barrier.
One barrier Sabajit alluded to, one of his first remarks was about the traditional relationship in a partnership. Could be more of a parent-child, the big vendor, the small supplier, could be the primary contractor, the subcontractor. I think that barrier, you have to disrupt that barrier. You have to come in as the supplier, and I'm speaking as a relatively small supplier. You have to come in, with kind of present yourself as a lot bigger than you are sometimes. You have to come in with a lot of confidence, and again, being able to communicate the value that you bring. First, you have to be sure you align with the folks you're trying to partner with, that there's the complementary business services or strengths and skills that you're going to bring to the table. But then you have to show that as this, in my case, as a small supplier, that you don't need to be micromanaged, that you can really stand on your own. Some organizations, and I know Todd has talked about that, his relationship with my company DDD at one point, where he was able to do a lot of training and provide a lot of support. And that's wonderful when an organization can provide that, but very often organizations can't. And so you have to really be able to stand on your own and be easy to do business with through your being very proactive with project management, solutioning, being able to communicate and show that you can really have an equal and collaborative relationship and overcome that barrier of buyers seeing you or partners seeing you as someone that's going to maybe be a drain on their resources. Because Dan, you made that point before about many buyers are trying to narrow their supply chain. And you want to be in there and say, you know what, I can come in and do a good job. and bring a lot of value to the relationship.
Absolutely. Thank you. Again, I think that's a great way to think about barriers, because what you have done is to actually identify mental barrier, if you will, right? You know, and I like the way you described it as being able to present yourself as having a full range of capabilities, right? Rather than necessarily slotting into somebody's preconceived notion of a small company. Shubhajit, you were saying you wanted to come in?
Yeah, there's if I may,
Sure.
just to add on to what Mary was mentioning is that many times when we are bidding for business, we don't realize uh, if we have done our homework correctly, uh, and if we've understood the requirements of our customer correctly, I think we can still succeed. It's not the price, it's not the size, but it is. So sometimes I ask not just when we bid for business, but also partners who are trying to reach out to me and saying that, how do we work with you? I always try to say, put yourself in my shoes. If you've understood what my pains are, if you've crafted the right messaging, I promise you, you will have success. But sometimes you just need to be patient and just keep hammering away. Again, in the world of partnerships, I've found many times even senior management, even many of my peers, they sometimes give up and say this is not working. But sometimes you just need to persist. If you are confident that what you're doing is value for the buyer or the partner, sometimes you just have to have patience and just slug away. But don't change, but just be available and be consistent. That's my message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you. That's good. Now, I see that we are beginning to get some questions from the audience. So let's complete the round of the panelists identifying a barrier that they have faced and a countermeasure, and then we'll get to the audience questions. So, Mary, how would you describe a barrier that you have run into?
Ravi, we have seen, or actually I have seen personally, many different barriers. And when you're looking at, again, to impact sourcing, if it's with a smaller company and Sprint and now T-Mobile, I think one of the biggest barriers, there's actually two barriers, and one of them addresses the question about how do you find the right person. But the initial barrier is one of scale. If you are a large company and you have a large demand, how do you use those smaller companies, and how does a small company expect to be able to address the needs of a larger company? And we found ourselves in that quandary actually more than once, more than twice, and as a matter of fact, in several different categories. So what I'd like to share is what we did. Sometimes if you look at a specific project, we had a large network build project many years ago, and Sprint being a federal contractor, we've got an objective for a percentage of our spend with diverse suppliers. I know for California, the CPUC also has more specific objectives, broadly in that area. And so what we did is, based on that large project, we brought our three OEMs, our original equipment manufacturers, in, and we said, okay, if we're doing this build out, we know that we have to purchase equipment only from these three suppliers because they were the ones who were able to make it. They met all the criteria and so forth. But there was still a large opportunity for our smaller businesses. So what we did is we put together what we called a matchmaking event. And this is where the business unit partnered with sourcing, and we identified across the board a number of different suppliers in various functional areas, services and some goods. And we culled that list down. We started off with a couple of hundred suppliers, ultimately culling the list down to 71 suppliers, I believe, and then we had a day-long matchmaking event, and it was kicked off by our chief technology officer at the time. We had the 3 OEMs there, and the 3 OEMs basically had these little profiles of the various suppliers that they could subcontract with. And they identified which ones they wanted to interview. And like a matchmaking event, we had like 10-minute, 15-minute interviews, and each OEM had identified a number of suppliers. At the end, there were follow-up meetings that were held independently with the OEMs and the potential suppliers. And we polled both the OEMs as well as the individual suppliers. And I did an after-action review on that. It was a home run for everyone because you were able to put your smaller businesses in front of the people who could give them, the companies who can give them business. The scale was addressed. And in many cases, if you have a newer supplier and they don't quite meet all of our requirements, we may ask that they consider subbing to a more established supplier so that they build up. And I think that barrier of scale can be addressed, and that smaller supplier understands, they build a track record, they learn how to work with you. And one of the barriers, how do you get in front of the right people? Again, I go back to my previous example, is if I can't understand how you are different and what exactly you do, and to Jackie's point, your value proposition, I can't connect you. So generally, larger companies will have a supplier diversity group. They may even have an online registration. T-Mobile has an online registration. But reach out to people you know, and then see how you can potentially make that connection and find out who might be most appropriate. The power of relationship will always transcend a poorly written contract, based on my personal experience. And don't expect a strongly written or good contract to overcome a bad relationship. It doesn't. It's that human connection and the desire to genuinely see the possibilities that both of you together can bring, I think is really what it's all about.
That's fantastic. Thank you again. What your last point brings to mind is this sort of truism in the field of alliances, that you do need alliances to have a contractual basis. But if you have to refer to that contract, that already means that the alliance is in difficulty. But thanks again. Dan, is there a barrier and an associated countermeasure that you'd like to share?
Sure. I also want to try and avoid where I can any, general guidance, but every company has capabilities, large and small, and I think that one of the messages that I would give is that persistence is a lot different than confidence and being aggressive. In fact, I think having had the benefit of being on both sides of a large company and a small company in the same place. At one point we had to decide, could we afford hotels and plane tickets? And in another side, we're chartering planes to go give presentations. And I think one of the messages that we've learned along the way is you really have to decide who you should be doing business with, not who you can get business from, not who you want to have on your customer list. I think folks just undervalue the persistence aspect, right? Deciding the small number of companies that you really think you can bring some value to and sticking with it. So often we see people coming in looking to very quickly get something and move along. I would also encourage folks to think about team approach. Anytime you're approaching a new partnership, the person on the other side needs to see that not only are you committed as a representative of that company, but your service delivery people, your executive team, everyone's focused on this. And it sounds like a little bit of a throwaway comment, but showing up and showing up consistently does get valued. And we've used that numerous times when there's been people that have been much more, I wouldn't say much more qualified, but as qualified as we were, and we were unknown.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Again, I think in some ways, talking about specific barriers that you might have experienced, sort of is a way for us, I think, to look at what can derail some of those partnerships. And part of the discipline, the blocking and the tackling that Todd was referring to, is really understanding what some of those barriers might be. So thank you, appreciate that. Todd, so you get the last word in terms of these barriers. Again, since you put the blocking and the tackling metaphor on the table, what are some barriers that can stop the effectiveness of blocking and tackling in this area?
Well, thanks for the question, and those were great responses from my fellow panelists. There's a lot of wisdom in all of those. I would say organization is an obstacle that I've encountered in my time, and I'll explain that. Before I worked at Ancestry, I worked for a very large company, and I managed operations, but I had to buy services through a large purchasing organization that was associated with it. And sometimes that was okay because some of the people I would work with were forward-thinking professionals, and they knew to set the operation at the heart of all of those discussions, and they provided guidance around it. But then I also worked with some real knuckleheads that thought they were the only ones that could have any interaction with vendors and potential clients, and they had to decide what the criteria was. And so my advice on the buy side for that, my countermeasure for that barrier is learn some organizational jujitsu. And you're going to be held accountable for your business results, period. And if you defer and say, oh, well, that, dingbat in purchasing, he sort of kept me from getting the right people, nobody's going to care. You're going to lose your job. So you have to figure out a way. And sometimes I've used some sharp elbows and some sharp words to do that. But you have to get in front of, if your organization's the one doing the value, you've got to assert yourself in finding these partners and not let the organization be the reason why you don't have great partners and why you're not integrating and innovating together. So, if you're a supply chain professional, your job is to get that operational, that customer centric, that commercial entity engaged in a meaningful way so that there's an exchange of value. The other barrier is a lack of capacity to teach and train and upscale. Jackie talked a little bit about it, and Mary's talked a lot about it, to improve a supplier who isn't an exact fit for what you're trying to do. And that's a really valuable muscle to build and a capacity to gain in your organization. It gives you a much wider range of possibilities. I've been in situations, in an e-commerce world where there's no purchasing department. There were just me and the operation. Oh, you're meeting with the CEO and he says, yeah, we're going to scale like 3x and add about 7 different countries into our market plan over the next 18 months. So, build that capacity out, have a great day. And if you can only sort of custom fit one or two suppliers into that chain, you're going to die. So thankfully, I had built the capacity to say, all right, my team knows how to build up a capacity to fit what we need to do. So that's the solution if your suppliers don't always match perfectly to what you're trying to do. And from the supplier side, show that you're teachable, show that you're scalable, show that you're willing to put in the energy and time to become excellent at what's important to your client, and demonstrate it through your actions.
Yeah, that's great. Again, I think yeah, during the Q&A phase, if we have time, I'd really like to come back to some of those personal characteristics and skills. You mentioned knowing organizational jujitsu, right? That as important as formal process is, right? A lot of alliance work is maybe supplementing those formal processes with those personal skills and relationships. So I hope we'll get a chance to come back to it, before we conclude the session. But Shubhajit, I know, you might have some thoughts before we leave the topic of barriers on, how from the standpoint of a large provider, there might be, specific barriers that we have not touched upon so far. Anything you'd like to add to what the panelists have already said?
Sure. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes. Yeah.
The point I'd like to make is, and then maybe Dan, you could chip in here, is when one looks at the service provider market, right, which is the large providers as well as the actual service providers who hire, impact workers. Service providers, the larger service providers have an interesting question to ask themselves, which is, um, should we do this ourselves or should we partner? It's like the build versus partner or buy versus ally, right? You look at the two options. And I think many times I have found, and the barrier, the single word problem in terms of, in my opinion, is just inertia and doing business the way we've always done, which is, I think when a company like even my own company, we have this, when we try to address the needs of a buyer, we try to see, can we do it all ourselves? And even if we do a reach out, there are conventional sources of where we will attract that talent. But I think the fact that there's a complete ecosystem of actual service providers providing impact in the community is something which one is not aware of or one is uncomfortable bringing in. So, DDD, for example, right? We've had a lot of conversations, but we haven't been able to bring them into active conversations in some of our client engagements. We've worked with multiple partners, NDAs are in place, taking the idea model. But the question is, we've got even the define stage done, but the established phases where we are now kind of stuck. Sometimes it's because of the buyer, because at the end of the day, these are complex needs of a customer. But I think the big resistance I'm finding is, how do we get our resourcing team to start looking at doing things differently, particularly bringing in partners from the impact sourcing world. And Dan, maybe you could provide your thoughts. How much of your focus on partnering versus doing the impact work yourself?
It's a great question, and something that has been thought about, since the beginning of the topic. I remember this topic coming up in 2013. I hate to date myself, but the potential for multiple providers to be working together has never been greater. I think on the flip side, how do you manage relationships? How do companies remunerate? How do you contract? Who's accountable for outcomes? I think those are some of the, for lack of a better word, barriers that need to be worked out. But I don't have a specific example of where I've seen a great multi-provider attack. but I'll just leave it with, I think the potential's never been greater. It's a great time to be in this game, because I believe people are looking at different kinds of suppliers, more so than ever before. How to join together and address a customer need, I think that's a lot of TBD. And we just don't have a good example of having worked with multiple players. There are probably others that have.
Yeah.
But people are looking for sure.
True.
Excellent. Thank you. So, before we turn to some of the questions that Shubhajit, I know you have in mind, including addressing the questions that have come in from the attendees. I just want to say that keeping in mind what Debbie said at the beginning of our session about the association working on a center of excellence on impact sourcing, and combining that with the range of interesting insights and experiences that these panelists have shared, I have no doubt that this is only the first of many conversations that we will have, right? So as a moderator, I can think about, at least half a dozen questions that I could ask just based on what all of you have shared already. But I know we have other questions that we want to get to. So at this stage, I'm going to thank all of the panelists. You couldn't have made my job any easier. And so thank you. With that, let me hand you back to Shubhajit to handle the questions as well as to do the wrap up.
Great. Thanks so much, Ravi. And I'll ask the panelists to still stay on, and let's maybe go through the questions which may have come in, and open to everyone in the audience here. Remember, this is an interactive session, but just so that we could cover all the content we had to kind of stay on track and kind of keep the questions coming in. So let's take them one at a time. And Amanda, if you could just let me know which are the key questions which we could address from the audience. While we wait for the questions to come in, I will bring in one point, and it's very relevant for the entire audience here. We are aware that we basically comprise three kind of sections, and you notice that our panelists today, we try to make sure that we had a good representation of buyers, big and small. Actually, both are very big, but which is T-Mobile and the World Bank. But we had Dan representing the larger service provider ecosystem, and Jackie from the slightly smaller service providers, but with very strong social and impact focus. I mean, DDD as a model has been fantastic. Many companies have replicated what they've done. So I'm glad they've actually kind of helped inspire many more. And I must admit that that's how I got involved into impact sourcing, was because of when I started learning about what DDD, how it started off, and how it's progressed since. Where I think I'd like to bring up is, you have this interesting ecosystem of three groups: the buyers, the large service providers, and the smaller service providers. And everyone is like, when I talk to the large buyers, we have a very curious position as a large service provider. The buyers confide in us because they already have relationships with companies like us, like Tech Mahindra, right? There's our multi-million-dollar, multi-year, multi-tower partnerships, outsourcing agreements. So they sometimes confide and say, look, we fully understand, we want to do impact sourcing, but we can't manage so many of the smaller impact sourcing companies. As Mary and Todd was mentioning, sometimes you're trying to rationalize the number of service providers you manage, but you don't want to compromise on the fact that we also want to create impact. So the funny or the curious dilemma is, everyone appreciates what the smaller providers do, but the buyers don't have the capacity to manage that, and and that's where I think it's very important for us to think of this essence of partnership, because maybe to some extent the large global service providers have a responsibility here. They already have relationships with the large buyers, and they have the ability to try and contract and partner with smaller providers. And when I've talked to some of these largest buyers in the world, they say, we love it, we want to do it, but we need to scale it, and to scale it, everyone has to start participating. And that's the essence of why I think when we were talking with Debbie, and we said this is the whole reason we need to create more partnerships. And it doesn't matter, there is so much that the buyers want to give to the world of impact sourcing, but there's so much which is kind of held back because people are wearing masks, we are wearing organizational walls and silos, and that sometimes prevents us. So I hope you noticed in the core content we shared today, we're talking about making it as transparent as possible. You're not opening up everything, but you're explaining why you need multiple partners. You're explaining why you will tier the partners. You will put in metrics to help them also gauge how they're progressing, but you're also guiding them on how they can progress. And you, on your side, as a large provider, have anyway metrics to provide to your customers, right? So it's very interesting to see this this new I would say, curveball, which at least came to me through some of the largest buyers in the world. And they brought them up in multiple GISC sessions. And immediately, the fun part was that the number of calls which were coming into us inside TechM, because there were many partners who said, can we work with you? Because we have buyers who are saying we want to we want to work, but we don't want to do it directly. We would rather work with the global providers. All the more reason I'm just trying to bring up the need for partnering and the need for that transparency and increased collaboration between ourselves.
Shubhajit, if I may, and again, I think this is in response to one of the questions. I'm sitting squarely when I say in the buyer space, I'm in procurement.
Yeah.
But the actual owner of the budget and the consumer of the services is in a business unit. And I thoroughly understand that there is this juxtaposition of, we want to help the smaller companies, but they can't scale. How do we do it? So there are actually two different ways.
Mm-hmm.
One is to more holistically look at a service and see if, on the make versus buy, if that service can be outsourced as a BPO. And if it can, then maybe that service provider becomes that shell, if you will, under which you've got individual contracts that they are managing, and those individual contracts are with smaller or diverse suppliers. In Sprint, we have had an example of that. It worked great. We were able to address the need to have diverse dollars, but without the large number of suppliers we would have to personally manage. The other way is that if you are purchasing goods or services from suppliers, then if you're looking to have a responsible supply chain, we need to make sure that those suppliers have plans in place. They will do what they are incentivized to do. And if they're incentivized to, because you're purchasing goods or services from them, then they should have a supplier diversity plan. So if it's, tell us how you plan to allocate X, a percent of our dollars to smaller and diverse suppliers. Tell us about your programs. How are you developing? And so you're making your decisions, your buy-side decisions, really resonate up a supply chain without having always that burden to overcome. Frequently, we also hear, how do you get to the right person? If there's a will, there's a way. And I would look at, trying to understand that larger company, in the case of Sprint, or now in the case of T-Mobile. Go on our website, look in the popular press, understand what some of our objectives are, but look at who and where we are cross-connecting. Chambers of commerce, minority supplier development councils. IAOP is a phenomenal resource for making connections. And if I'm not the right person, then I will connect the person, a supplier to the right person. So the idea that you're trying to swim in a deep pool and you don't know where the sharks are, there are ways, and I think that's where the resources for IAOP, the centers of excellence, I'm very jazzed about, and hopefully just making a single connection can lead to multiple connections. So I hope that answers some of the questions and addresses maybe how to get past some of the barriers out there.
Yeah, it definitely works for me. I mean, I hope there are some of my own colleagues who are listening in, and hopefully some of our partners with whom we already have NDAs in place. We are continuously trying to figure out how do we take things from here. And the point, I believe, is, there's organic growth, but can we do things differently in the world of impact sourcing? And my request to my colleagues and our partners is that let's build the business case of why can companies like us help customers go with a full plan and say, this is, like you said, Mary, that what are we doing differently? What are we doing specifically to make our supply base more diverse? How are we putting in impact sourcing into that, putting those metrics for measuring that there is greater impact to community? Those are the pieces which need to be done. But I mean, I hope that my own colleagues, as well as the other large service providers who are doing things the way they've always done, start realizing that this is possibly something they can do as an increment or as a new change. And I think there's a larger piece, whether we like it or not as global service providers. I think the big buyers are also savvy. We have a number of them in the audience today. Those buyers are going to hear what we are saying about impact sourcing and start forcing it onto the service provider ecosystem and say, listen, you want to play with me? If you, again, it's a question of you want to move to that next level of tiered partnership, I will do that, provided you've proven to me that you've checked off these items. What did you do differently? And give me the data. I think that will become an eye-opener for the large service providers. And then I think the smaller service providers who actually do the impact can actually try and show, listen, we are focused on this. We work just with refugees. We work just with LGBTQ. We just work with the autistic. Why are you not bringing us? Because we can become that differentiator for you. Remember, we were talking about the two types of partners, right? There's the enabling partner, which will help you qualify. And then there's the differentiating partners, which will help you win. When there are 6 service providers or 4 service providers, or there are 2 service providers, as you reach the final stage, what's different about you, dear service provider? And
So
that's you can have that content.
So can I just jump in and offer a quick perspective on both questions? My response to the small supplier trying to get in with the large company is a more primal predatory sort of answer, which is differentiate yourself. I mean, I've looked at for the suite of services I was trying to buy, the very large service providers were a disastrous mismatch. And I was looking for something more nimble, more aggressive, more teachable. So it's strength versus weakness. And large suppliers can't be everything to everybody. And there's a competitive place where you can fit and position yourself, and you build a train of successful client engagements, and they'll start coming to you, right? They'll start the way that works is you get noticed by winning in their competitive world by the services you're providing to some of their smaller competing entities, and you can win. And to the question on, how do you find out who to go to? The simple answer is find out where the money flows. I mean, that's the simple answer. Find out who's making the spending decisions, but learn how to get to that kind of insight and information by wanting to understand at a deeper level where and how value is being created in the organization. When you've learned to probe where value is and what the competitive situation is, and you've signed your NDA and you're asking all these kinds of questions about, and can I talk with people who are in these trenches and fighting this so that I can see where we might align and where we might offer benefit. That's what you really should be seeking for. Seek where the value is being generated and build great relationships with all of the other gatekeeper entities around that activity.
Great point, Todd.
Then if I may, and say the small suppliers, the impact sourcing suppliers have to take some responsibility in terms of building their networks, of finding the champions within the buying community. And when you're doing well with one relationship, see if you can leverage that relationship and have people speak on your behalf. As Todd was just saying, that people start coming to you when you have that reputation of being able to deliver and be a good partner. It's something that, as the supplier, we have to take that responsibility, as I said, and be there for the buyer, and that's how you can organically grow your business and hopefully expand the existing business relationships and find some new partners.
Sure. Great. All right.
Go ahead and jump in, Shubhajit. You've basically covered so much that I'm sure all of these questions have already been addressed, but two specific ones just in case. And for you out there, if we're not covering it, could you type it back in maybe more specifically, just so we can make sure, because the wealth of information coming out of this panel is incredible. But you've talked about this a lot, but just to be very specific, what would then be compelling for the large players considering partners in any service delivery? We've kind of gone around all that, but what's the bottom line?
The bottom line is the bottom line. Number one, it is actually more cost effective to work with the smaller players. Their cost structures are lower. And I think at least in the world where I come in the world of business process outsourcing or contact centers or back office support, there is value, because the biggest problem in this business is attrition. And it is proven already many times over. Our HR recognizes it. We appreciate the value. Resources who come in from the impacted society pools of, and they have always outperformed in terms of quality of work, sticking and retention in the company, and I guess commitment to the business. So I think. So there's no doubt that there's a business case which is absolutely perfect. The only challenge is kind of, as I said, breaking the business as usual mindset and trying to look at this more openly and to try and include that into part of our service delivery mechanism.
I really like what Dan said, which is you should pay attention to who you want to work with. I mean, Dan's point around all that, I think, is as fundamental as delivering, to the bottom line.
My take on this topic from a what's the bottom line? I can tell you this: the power of the pen is extremely important. One substantial buyer puts one line in an inquiry. We would like to give preference to companies that bring in a differentiating partner, change the whole dynamic of how things will work. So you can do a lot on the provider side, but very simply, it doesn't mean you're going to award the business, but we're going to give preferential treatment to people who come to the table with one or more partners. Watch what happens.
If I can, I'd like to actually take a little bit of a different tack, kind of, and again, it's all collective. And I'd like to build off of what Jackie has said. Jackie, you said networking. And to me, the conversation about partnering isn't just a buy-sell relationship. It isn't just, we're a partner now because you're selling to me and I'm buying from you. I think where some of those large companies can look more holistically at relationships is that you've got a lot of expertise sitting in the large company. And if we don't purchase your services, we've got expertise to help you become a better company so that your bottom line is impacted. And I've seen that done in the past. I've also had an opportunity to meet with it was a firm that was owned by a veteran, now that I think of it. And he came to a meeting with his little PowerPoint, did his song and dance, and I couldn't understand what his value proposition was. I was trying to figure out how is he different, and then he started talking about his passion, and I understood more about what he shared with his passion. And then some of what I described to him, he went back and tried figuring out he was marketing all wrong. He was marketing based on what he thought we needed to hear. And as a result, as our spend went down with him, his revenues went up with other customers simply because we had partnered to help make him a better company. And I think that's where we need to look at networking and partnering so that that rising tide that floats all boats actually does become a reality.
Mary, can I kind of jump in with this other question that kind of maybe feeds right into this? And this one is, someone like T-Mobile or World Bank, when you work with any partner, do you segregate by size or competence? Or it actually is more like the relationship and the conversation, the way you were describing it. But do you do size or competence?
Okay, well, I'll take the first answer on that. When you say segregate, sitting on the buy side, typically you will have an evaluation of your supplier pool where you do have segmentation of your suppliers. You might have tier 1 suppliers, tier 2 and 3 and so forth. And your relationship and how you manage those suppliers might be based on the amount of spend. But as far as I think there's the table is big enough, there's room for a lot of people. And the trick is to understand what the company needs, what a T-Mobile might need, and how best to connect with a person who can provide some feedback. And if your services or your company don't quite match what we need, there are opportunities out there. Again, maybe subcontracting or something like that. But we don't treat our suppliers inherently differently, like one is better than the other. We may manage them differently, and that's a classic, buyer 101 or supply chain 101 on supplier segmentation. So I hope that answers some of the questions. One of the resources I would also suggest, especially if you're looking at a large company, do simple Google searches, but also see if that company has filed supplier diversity reports. California Public Utilities Commission, CPUC, is a great resource. You can find out what the company's doing, what their measures are, and how successful they are. And now you're smarter as far as what matters to those large companies.
Oh, that's great. Todd, do you want to jump in?
I wouldn't add much to that. I would say the more important question is still what you have to offer, rather than trying to map out what the landscape is like, because that's going to be different in every company you try to go for. Even if they all apply similar models, they're going to define categories differently or things like that. So, I would still focus on what you do well and attack from that perspective, rather than try to map the field into some static place for you to go into.
Right. All right, Debbie, if I can then, let's talk about next steps. we've asked, and I hope for those in the audience, we've been able to cover what we had planned, which was to kind of get you more familiar with the concepts of partnering, teaching you with a couple of, equipping you with a couple of simple steps which you could adopt as you go about partnering. I like to point which Ravi had brought up earlier, which is, it's like teaching finance to non-finance people. The objective of this session was not to make you an accountant or not to make you an alliance manager, but to make you be more comfortable with what goes into partnering. So, we will have more content about partnerships in future, but we hope today you've at least been able to get the basics of, so where everyone in the company and your team are at least more familiar with the terms used in partnering, because otherwise I've seen so many times supplier, vendor, outsourcer, provider being used while but most times it's always couched with the word partnership. But hopefully today you've got a better idea about what is really the underlying discipline of partnering, and you've got better equipped as you go about in the world, in your world of business, as well as the world of impact sourcing. um, these recordings, the recording is available. This presentation will be available for anyone who sends out an email to Amanda or to Debbie or to me. But please feel free to continuously use the SRO community as a place where you can get more inputs. There will be more content coming in. Thanks everyone from the panel, and also to Amanda and Debbie for giving us this opportunity. If I can, before we finally, call it a day, I just want to ask Debbie, what do you feel as a question to you? And you don't have to really put a definitive answer, but in general, how can we continue with building the power of partnership or the competency of partnership within the member community in the IAOP? That's one question for you.
Well, certainly it's through continuing programs like this. I think that this is just the beginning, and the opportunity for people to perhaps send things in ahead of time. We could create some kind of forum, whether it's a LinkedIn group or something else. Let me give this some thought as we build the COE, because the opportunity for connecting people is, I think, the most important thing we can do. Education is great. Sharing ideas is critical, but the connection so that people can learn why they should partner. And this isn't just impact sourcing. We talk about this across the board, how valuable it is, and collaboration is critical. So I would say, let's all stay connected. We are going to be doing much more on our website with respect to the Impact Sourcing Resource Center that we have up there now. And anybody that wants to get involved or find out more, just again, drop me an email or Amanda, Shubhajit, any of these panel members. They're all involved. We're all part of the same, impact sourcing SRO community. And the more we can build it, I think the better it will be for everyone in the industry. So does that kind of answer the question?
It does. Thank you. I think I just want to make sure
we're committed to making sure this is just the beginning.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, that brings me to the end of our session. I think we've stayed within our appointed time. I hope we were able to meet all the expectations of our audience. I believe there's a smart feedback system in the IAOP portal, but looking forward to continuing this dialogue. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you so much for the time, the talent, the commitment. I know it's been a tremendous amount of work for all of you, Shubhajit, especially everything you've put together, but I'm sure everyone out there appreciates it. Everyone that's going to hear this after the fact appreciates it, and nobody appreciates it more than me. So thanks very much to the panel. Thanks to all of you for having spent 4 days with us, and together we can make an impact. It's just the beginning. Take care, everybody.